On behalf of the Department of Psychiatry, I welcome you all to the prestigious 5th Professor Narendranath Wig Oration organized by the Department of Psychiatry. I now invite Professor Vivek Lal, Director and Head of the Department of Neurology, to address the audience.
Namaskar everyone, sorry for being late by a couple of minutes. I see esteemed guests in this audience. I will not take names because then ek aadhe ka agar naam reh jata, the fellow feels bad about it. So my apologies, please. My apologies, I never take names. But I mean everyone and I wish everyone a very good afternoon, especially Professor Wig's son and the lady next to him, I presume is his daughter-in-law, right? Right. So I've been asked to, say a few words on Professor Wig. I'm not going to tell you he was a great psychiatrist. The whole world knows that. I'm not going to tell you that he was the founding head of psychiatry in PGI Chandigarh. The whole world knows that. But I'll just add another one, that he was one of the iconic colossus between the 60s and 80s who established PGI and took it on a trajectory where it is today. I'm not saying where it is today. We are going down. We'll try to get it back to where it was before. But he was one of the few who was singularly responsible for putting PGI on that trajectory, along with Professor Tulsi Das, Professor S.S. Anand, to name a few. I'm not going to tell you that he was a WHO advisor. The whole world knows that. What I'm going to tell you is what only I know. I joined this institute in 1987. By that time, he had left. He had gone to All India Institute as HOD, and between 1980 and 1990 he was HOD there. So how did I meet him? This is very important. We met in an orphanage. Both of us used to go to a common orphanage where both of us saw the same group of patients. It was a bond, it was a friendship like no other. I would take care of the neurology aspect. I was an assistant professor at that time. He was a Gulliver of sorts. He had retired. I'm talking of 1990, early 1990. And I was a Lilliputian in front of him. I would take care of the neurology aspect. He would take care of the psychiatry aspect. We would both meet every Sunday. And we would spend an hour together, followed by a cup of tea. I followed him to Lala Rajpat Rai Bhavan, where he would sit in the evenings. And that was not because I was his patient, not because I wanted to be a psychiatrist. I can never be one because I have no patience in me. So psychiatry is out of my curriculum. But I just wanted to see the way he would talk to patients. For those of us who are regular tweeters, you understand the meaning of the word tweeters, who believe in the world of glamour without doing an adequate or commensurate amount, it would have done them a ton of good to see just how patient he was with his patients. He had an eternal smile on his face, which I never understood because in PGI smiling was a taboo at that time. But he was so compassionate. I think he used to spend 3 hours at the Lala Lajpat Rai Bhavan. He was a member of the Servants of India Society, and the room where he sat, I don't know whether that room had an AC. I think that room didn't have an AC. It was just a fan which was on top, and did have the photograph of another iconic psychiatrist behind him, Dr. Vidyasagar from Rohtak Medical College, another legendary psychiatrist who's probably, arguably the father of Indian psychiatry. And I believe that Dr. Vidyasagar's nephew was your student, grandson. He was, because we were batchmates, I faintly remember, and he went to Kuwait subsequently. Dinesh, right. He's in Australia, okay, so that's right, thank you. There was something unique about him, as was unique about those who were the founding fathers of PGI at that time. I'm telling you what. Their heart and their breath was always for PGI. ये नहीं होता था कि उस टाइम इन फाइटिंग नहीं होती थी, बहुत होती थी, इससे ज्यादा होती थी मैं बताऊं. LT1 on Friday morning used to be a Israel-Palestinian war ground. There used to be a statistical meeting. On Friday morning, it used to become a war ground. But outside this room, It was all camaraderie. No one went to the press unnecessarily. No one undermined the dignity of PGI. No one, no one. You only heard of a lighthouse called PGI if you were outside PGI. And that is what took PGI to the trajectory, to the glory that it was once. Professor Wig was instrumental in getting us the WHO collaboration with, probably the only Asian center at that time in 1976. I think the year was 1976 when WHO made PGI Chandigarh collaboration, the collaborating center, the only one in Asia, the only one in Asia. People, you come to know about their true sentiments by what they do. He started the community mental health care program in Raipur Rani. I didn't know that, in fact. It's only when I was reading his biography, I read that note by you and Shubho. And you can understand, only he could have done it. And today, it's pivotal because I think it's become a center, and it's become a nodal center for how community healthcare programs are being structured in all developing countries. Today we are talking of mental health. There's a lot of talk on mental health, especially in the post-COVID era. And we talk of communication skills, and we talk of this, we talk of that. If there's one thing that I learned from Professor Wig during my interactions with him in the orphanages was to have a sound mind. You have to be socially conscious. You have to be very compassionate. To me, that is the bedrock of mental health. That is the bedrock of mental health. Most of us, when we are nearing a retirement, we kind of develop cold feet. Kya hoga hamara, kya nahi hoga, etc., etc. He had a plan ready. He jumped right from PGI and did his unfinished work in Lala Lajpat Rai Bhavan, in the orphanages where we often met. And when I heard that and the other thing good about him is he's never kept a mobile. Correct me if I was wrong. He never kept a mobile. So I always used to get a phone call from his landline, and that number is still fed in my phone. That number is still fed in my phone. Vivek, Professor Wig bol rahe hain. I missed you this Sunday. That message was enough. You didn't come this Sunday. And that's how he was. That is the character, the gravitas, the substance of a man that, ma'am, you will be honoring today by delivering the oration. The reason I took an extra 2 minutes is often what happens after an oration, we forget the man till the next oration. I wanted you to know the person whom we are talking of, the icon we are discussing today, and in whose memory we are giving the oration. I believe you're an architecture, I remember that because I once asked him, and he told me, you stay in Panchkula. So I have a brief insight into a few things. We often met. And the other good thing about him was, which I often tell my children also, he was ruthlessly punctual. Now that's a stress on me. That's a stress on me. But he was ruthlessly punctual. He was always there on time. And if you were late, he was forgiving. That's a good point. The last time I met him was in the Missionaries of Charity in Sector 23, where we were discussing a patient who had very severe brain damage. So I had put the patient on haloperidol. I said, this patient is probably severe, psychosis, and haloperidol is an excellent drug. So the patient got some side effects. I have never forgotten the last encounter. He said, Vivek, it's okay to give haloperidol, but probably we've got to move on. We've got to replace this with a few other drugs. I make this statement in this hall. Many of the patients that he treated with other drugs are still alive today. They are still alive today. I go once a while, whenever I get time. They are on treatment, and they are far better than they were before we met. When the Regional Institute of Psychiatry, Ranchi, used to send students to us. There used to be an exchange program. You remember? Now it's no longer there. So I would take these, students to that place where we would often meet Professor Wig, and we could learn a few things from him there. That was the giant that we are going to commemorate today. Thank you so much for coming. And it's simply worthy of his memory that we all are here, and we will remember him for as long as we are around. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now we invite Professor Basu to introduce our speaker.
Thank you very much, Dr. Swapnajit, and thank you, sir, for a very personalized, a very lively, and to make the man come alive. That's really appreciated. Just to carry on that legacy, I thought that we'll show one more photograph here. That's with Mrs. Veena Wig. There are some other photos, but these are on the staircase of the Karen block, if you can recall. So they were just staying there, like young people, immaculately dressed and with a beautiful sense of smile. So anyway, there we are. Now it's my pleasant task to introduce today's person, Dr. Thara Rangaswamy, or known as Dr. Thara, as the person who will be delivering the oration which is bestowed in the honor of Professor NN Wig. Dr. Thara Rangaswamy is the co-founder, the former director for 23 years, and now the vice chairman of an NGO by the name of Schizophrenia Research Foundation, known as SCARF India. A very different kind of an NGO than what we normally, we kind of think of. Since 1984, the more we'll hear from Madam herself, but since 1984, she has been associated with that, and it has done yeoman's work, and not just work in the area of care, but also research and their intertwinings. That's what she's going to talk about, that research is not just for publishing papers. Research is something which should get into care of people, but that will come from the person herself. In 2020, she received the highest award, if I may say, of the Schizophrenia International Research Society, the CIRS Outstanding Clinical and Community Research Award, which is the apex body for work on schizophrenia in Florence, Italy. And this year, if I'm not mistaken, madam, you received the Nari Shakti Puraskar from the President of India. I think I saw, the photograph a few months ago. So that is, So rather than a very long history, because her talk will talk about itself, 40 years of care and research. So rather than saying that, okay, she started her MBBS and then did her PhD in disability in schizophrenia from University of Madras, and then joined the SCARF, which was a very young NGO at that time, by another illustrious person who is no longer now, of course, Professor M. Sarada Menon, and people who were completely dedicated in an era which was full of stigma, which was completely, so that was a very hard struggle. And then, of course, it's on and on and on, and rather than me spending the time, you talk about many of those researchers, Scopid, Intrepid, the international things, the one with Malla with Canada, and all those things, right? But at an Indian scene, one thing for which we all will remember her always is for the ideas, the Indian Disability Evaluation and Assessment Scale, which we use day in, day out for assessing the disability in people's with schizophrenia or with severe mental illness, for assessing disability. She got her Royal College of Psychiatry gold medal, the President's gold medal, long time ago in 2010, and etc., etc. There's a long list of awards. I'm not going into that because I know that you'd say that. So rather than going into that, let us now hear Dr. R. Thara, and that's it. Thank you, madam.
Good afternoon, and thanks to everybody here for bestowing this great honor on me to deliver Professor Wig's oration. A lot has been said. I must tell you, Basu, that after you sent the circular, I had about 10 people writing to me about Dr. Wig and how, it's so good that I'm able to deliver the oration. But what I'm saying is terribly, terribly personal. And as I said, talking about Dr. Wig is like carrying coals to Newcastle here. When I was, Dr. Wig used to come to GH, Madras Medical College, as an examiner. And that's when I first saw him. But he was out there and I was here. So like there was no real connect at that point in time, and we used to look up like that. But later on, when I went to WHO for a series of meetings, everybody, because they knew I was Indian, everybody would come to me and tell me how great Dr. Wig was. He was in the Afro region as a WHO representative, and they would talk about the phenomenal work that he did as a WHO representative. And that used to be, I mean, I used to feel very proud, because it's not very often that we hear good things said about Indian psychiatrists. So when you hear something like that, it really, makes you, it was inspirational. But what I'm going to tell you today is, this is a letter that I received from Dr. Wig, okay? This was 12th December 2001. So how many years ago? 21 years ago. And I'll tell you why he wrote this letter. It's not a very long letter, as you can see. I was born with cleft lip and palate. Some of you might have guessed it. And so I had written about it, about the problems I had, the challenges I had, and how I overcame them. You know, I had written in the Hindu. Hindu is a very well-known newspaper in Tamil Nadu, in Chennai. So it was titled Against All Odds. So I received a lot of letters, but this one was from Dr. Wig, dated 2001, 21 years ago. Dear Thara, I have read your recent personal article in the Hindu. I have been an admirer of your achievements for many years, but my admiration for you has gone up further after reading this article. Keep up your good work. So I hit cloud 9. What more endorsement or validation of my work do I want? It's much better than all the awards that you were talking about, Basu. I mean, awards come and go, but I think something like this, and that's why this letter I've kept for 21 years. You know, I mean, so this only shows, I mean, I may not have had the contact that you people had with him on a day-to-day basis, but I think he was the most inspirational psychiatrist of his generation that I have seen. And thank you again very much for giving me this honor and opportunity. Now I am going to wear my mask for the simple reason that I'm going to be traveling extensively for the next few days, and therefore please forgive me. So we founded SCARF in 1984, and the main founder was Dr. Sharda Menon, Padma Bhushan, who was superintendent of the mental hospital in Chennai. Those days it was still mental hospital. And Dr. Menon and Dr. Rajkumar, and we founded it. Like he said, we are a different kind of NGO, in the sense usual NGOs only deliver care, but we were very much into research, training, awareness, lobbying. And now, very recently, we have expanded to youth mental health and dementia. We are now a WHO collaborating center. We have been a WHO collaborating center for the last 20 years. So this is a book that I have handed over to your director. Please, I mean, in fact, even the e-book is available if you want to go through it. I'll be happy to send you the link. Now, before I go into this, what I'm basically going to talk to you about is when I first wanted to do research in SCARF itself, there was a lot of opposition. It was not an easy story, you know, because a lot of my board members and even some of my senior psychiatrists asked me, why are you doing research? What is the point? As it is, we have minimal resources. Should that not be spent in care and programs? Why are you doing research? So it was not easy, you know, for me to convince people that research is essential and research is important. Therefore, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to talk about all the major projects that we have done. We have done a lot more. And let me tell you, don't don't even bother to get into the details of the individual projects. It's well nigh impossible for you to understand about all the projects in 40 minutes. It will take you 40 hours, to be honest. I mean, if you really want to come to grips with the results and the implications and so on. But the basic thing is, as he said, I'm going to say how we utilized the process of research, the results of the research, and how did it feed into our service programs. Because as you know, in low resource settings like India, most of us can only do clinical research or social research. It's only a few centers that are very well funded by DBT and DST which can do biological research. So that's going to be the basic premise of my talk. What is a connection or interconnectedness? So this, as you know, is a favorite work of mine. It started with FACOS called SOFACOS, which was funded by the ICMR. It was done in 3 sites, Lucknow, Delhi, and not Delhi, Lucknow, Vellore, and Chennai. And I followed up these patients. Now I have followed them up for 35 years. This is one of the longest follow-up studies in this part of the world. So I'm only going to tell you, as I said, a glimpse of the findings. All of them were first episode patients. And what intrigued many Western readers is the very low level of drug and alcohol abuse in first episode patients that we had. But even now in Chennai, in SCARF, we find a very low level of drug and alcohol abuse. I don't know what the explanation is. And at 35 years, just look at the 35 years, if we were able to follow up 33%. But what is really very interesting is 35% were dead. And they were all pretty young when they started. They were only about 21 or so. So at the most, they were like in their 50s. And suicides are accounted for 7 out of these 32 patients who had died. And just as we all know, the commonest pattern, of course, was relapses. People had multiple relapses, about 63%. But what is heartening is quite a number of them on treatment, were still on treatment, and some of them were in SCARF. Now, deaths, as I told you, 32 out of 90 people died over 35 years. God knows how many more died, because even people who dropped out, some of them could have died, and we may not have had the information. And most of the suicides were hanging, self-immolation, and so on. And the bane of finding the cause of deaths in our population, not just psychiatric patients. Very often people die at home and nobody knows the cause because nothing gets documented very well. So we really did not know why somebody had actually died. And the other interesting finding we had was, of these, just the dead people, 50% of them were never married, and 22% of them were separated or divorced. So 72% did not have a partner of the people who died. So the question that arose in my mind was, does marriage protect against early deaths? It's a tall order. It's not marriage per se which protects you, but the kind of support you have from the spouse in taking you for treatment, in ensuring adherence. I'm still doing analysis on that, but that's just an interesting finding we had, and maybe some of you youngsters must do that kind of research here, and see of the people with bad prognosis, how many are married and how many are not. It's well worth looking into it. So what did we learn from all this, and how did we apply this knowledge? We knew how to do long-term follow-up studies. We knew how to handle dropouts. We knew how to aggressively follow up patients. And we knew that special needs of women had to be taken into consideration when you plan psychosocial rehabilitation for them. And more importantly, it's vital to monitor the physical health of these people. And if you come to this side, I'm sure you all know you are running a huge hospital. Wrong addresses given at the time of admission. We should beware of this. We take 2 to 3 addresses because that was one of the problems we had in tracing these dropouts. One thing is they change. There's a lot of internal urban migration. The other is they give the wrong address and just dump the person and get away. The second program was a disability in schizophrenia. That was my PhD. The main findings were people were largely concerned about occupational disability. And like they would say, it doesn't matter if he talks to himself once in a way or smiles, but if he can go for a job and bring back some money and look after himself and his family, we are more than happy. So that was the main finding of course, my lifelong regret is that I never published this. Can you believe that? I forced everybody to publish, but somehow something happened and I could not publish this. But the main thing which came out of this PhD was, all along, people from other disability groups, we always have competitors wherever we go, for like the physical disability, the sensory disability. They were saying, how do you say it's disability? You show us how the person is disabled. So that is when my PhD data came in handy, and I had to lobby with them very hard, lobby both at the state level and with the central level, and that led to the recognition or inclusion of mental disability in the Persons with Disabilities Act as early as 1995. Of course, NIMHANS was also lobbying, but that was one of the things that I could effectively use. And then, of course, it led to the development of the instrument, IDEAS, which is gazetted by the ministry and which is an official tool that is being used. So PhDs should not sit in the libraries or just in journals. They should get translated into active action, which will promote the well-being of people. The third study we did was, what is recovery? Recovery now is a very popular term. There are recovery-oriented programs, there are recovery-oriented centers in the US. So we did a lot of work on the recovery. I'm not getting into details of that. But the interesting thing was, what did people, families, patients think, what was recovery according to them? One was not having to take medicines anymore. That is recovery. I'm sure all of you are clinicians. I'm sure you understand what I'm saying. And this is especially with men. Participating in family functions. That again was recovery to them. And no relapses, no worsening of symptoms, and understanding of emotions. That also is recovery, because very often you have people say, the father's dead body is lying there, madam, and he doesn't even shed a tear. I mean, the family feels so sad that this person is not even able to express his emotions. So that really tears into them. So as I said, female said, once a doctor, based on my behavior, says that I can stop medicines, only then I will consider myself recovered. And what did the men say? When I don't shift my jobs, or in fact, they also said when I'm get job, then I am a normal person like others. So their concept of recovery is very different from, as clinicians or researchers, from our concept of recovery. So we have prioritized recovery-oriented interventions using patient-centric language. We have engaged patients and family in the recovery processes. So even peer support service, some pilot work that we are doing. We have established a LEAP program in SCARF. So this is how this was used. Some of you might know that, certainly Dr. Avasthy will know, that the Mental Health Act has advanced directives. So what this basically means is, when a person comes to you, you ask him, what is it you want to do? I mean, do you want, where do you want to get treated? What kind of treatment do you want? Do you want ECTs, any other treatment-related specification? So as a pilot, we just did this on a sample of patients who came to SCARF, and to our surprise, many of them were able to articulate. How this is going to be recorded, all that is another thing altogether, and how we are going to use it for them is a different issue. But we found that these were the results. Many of them said, 53% said, I want to be only in SCARF. I want to be treated only in SCARF. So it goes on like that. So what did we learn? We learned that this is a pilot attempt to study the advanced directives. Now in SCARF, we are using it as a part of our routine practice, more to train our younger colleagues, in how to engage patients in getting this kind of information. And quite contrary to what we think, they know a lot. It's just that we don't spend enough time with them. And they are very clear of what they want and what they don't want. The next study was abnormal movements in schizophrenia. Kraepelin, for those of you who have read Kraepelin, describes a person with schizophrenia those days when there was no treatment available, and he describes beautifully the abnormal movements, very similar to tardive dyskinesia. So we said, it's not so much me, but our collaborator, Dr. Robin McCready from Scotland, he came and said, Thara, this is an idea I have. I feel that even in unmedicated patients, you may find abnormal movements. So can we do this study in India? And so on. So we had a series of studies, and we did MRI studies on them. And these MRI studies were again replicated. And what did we find? In never treated subjects, dyskinesia was present in 35%. So don't always blame the antipsychotic. And especially this combination of age and not being treated with schizophrenia accelerates the it's all very neurological, doctor. It accelerates the process of dyskinesia. That's what we found in 35%. And Parkinsonism itself we found in 15% of the patients. So, all this has been published. So how did we apply this knowledge? We initiated a community mental health program in the catchment area because we found the average duration of untreated psychosis in any part of India, in rural India, is about 10 years. Probably in states like Bihar and Uttarakhand, it might be more because there are very few psychiatrists. But even in Tamil Nadu, where we have a fairly good system, the DUP is about 10 years. So we thought we should initiate a lot of community mental health programs. So this is a community mental health program which we initiated in Tirupurur. Before this, okay, I'll tell you something. What we did was, after we did the community mental health program, when we exited, we had 440 cases. Then I told my colleagues, my junior colleagues, after about 10 years, I told them, let's go and see. Let's go and revisit that place, and see how many of them are on treatment. What is happening to all those patients? See, I'll tell you the problem with NGO work is, our work depends on the sponsorship we have. See, if we are sponsored for, say, 5 years or 3 years, we do that much of work. But the bane there is sustainability, because we don't have the resources to sustain these community level programs. Okay, now we have the DMHP, but DMHP has its own limitations. So we revisited this, and we found that many of them, about 60% of them, had not taken any treatment at all. So that was one of the most discussed papers which we published in the International Journal of Health Systems. So having known this, what did we do? How did we apply this knowledge? We resorted to telepsychiatry clinics to improve access. We trained a lot of community level workers. We felt regular psychoeducation was important, and more importantly, involving local stakeholders. See, this is what I wanted to say. Many people think, when you go for exams and you ask people what community mental health is, they think delivering services outside a building, like you saw it under the tree or somewhere in a village, is community mental health. I think that's a totally wrong assumption. Just moving geographically from one place to another place is not community mental health. Community health is involving the local community, involving the stakeholders. That is what is meant by community mental health, and not merely dispensing the same haloperidol or risperidone outside, like you saw under the tree there. That is not community mental health. Then the next study that I'm talking about is the COPSI trial. It was led by Graham Thornycroft at the KCL, where basically we again gave collaborative community-based care. It was an RCT trial, very difficult, actually it was, to do it properly. And we used extensively, we used community health workers, and we produced some excellent manuals which are being used. So this is all the COPSI intervention material that we produced. This has been translated into many languages. If any of you want, you can write to us. And the centers were Goa and Chennai. But what we did find was, you just look at the Chennai bit, that's the first one. We found that both symptomatology and disability came down. And that happened only in Chennai, with this complex intervention being delivered. So it works. It works if you do it the proper way. But what we were very happy about was the informed consent procedure material that we had developed as part of the study, where for a totally illiterate population, a rural population, how do you even explain to them the process of informed consent? First of all, they don't understand what the study is about. So to explain the process of informed consent, this is what we had. These are all the materials we had used, like the coin. If it is heads and tails, that's something that they easily understand. So these were some of the packages that we had developed, which I think are being used extensively. So as I said, the manuals and training procedures were developed, and utilization of flip charts, and using flip charts and these procedures are far more easier with a rural illiterate population to convey what you want to say. So having done all this, knowing that there's a whole lot of untreated patients with the DUP, as I said, of 10 years, we started telepsychiatry in a big way. It was funded by the Tata Trust. We chose a rather backward district in Tamil Nadu called Pudukkottai. When we started, there was no DMHP there. So, I should say that we introduced mobile telepsychiatry. First time, I am very wary about saying first time for anything, because you don't know which corner of the world has what, So I would say, yes, this is one of the few mobile telepsychiatry units, or maybe there are no mobile telepsychiatry units, I'm not sure. But this is a bus that we had put together, and all the equipment was inside the bus. The psychiatrist was sitting in Chennai, and the community health workers were picking up the patients. There was a pharmacy on the bus, and there was a general physician who was looking after the physical aspects of the patients. All that was done, and this bus would move from place to place, picking up patients and connecting to us. Of course, once in 2 months, we did go and make a face-to-face visit, because I think nothing like a real face-to-face visit. So we pioneered this, and unfortunately now the funding stopped, so we had to kind of give up this program. But what we had done by then was to integrate all these patients into the district mental health program, because by then Pudukkottai had a district mental health program. So the reach of the clinics was extremely good, and strangely there was not so much stigma. Getting into the bus and getting out was not considered very stigmatized. In fact, people liked the yellow and the blue and all that. And 45% of the service utilizers were actually from outside the catchment area. And when they do, just forget what is the most important message here is, if you are able to ensure 3 visits, consecutive visits of the patient to the clinic, then they are there to stay. The maximum dropout happens between visit 1 and visit 3. I mean, there will be dropouts later, but generally, this is what our data showed. So we told all the CLWs and all our staff, make a major push in that direction and make sure that all these people come at least for the first 3 consecutive visits. And then you kind of, have them with you. At least they have confidence, there's much more rapport building, and so on. So, and this knowledge also helped us start telepsychiatric clinics during the COVID pandemic. Now, of course, the government of India is going to inaugurate the Tele Manas program sometime next month, I think. Oh, is that so? Okay. So, which means it's kind of scaling up and really doing good. And I know Chandigarh also has done very pioneering work in telepsychiatry. I've read Savita's papers on that. So now telepsychiatry is now offered as part of routine clinical service. Then this is the ongoing study that we have called Intrepid. I for India, N for Nigeria, T for Trinidad. These are the three sites. Of course, Trinidad is not the Lamy country site, but Nigeria and India are. And basically, we looked at incidence, presentation, 2-year course and outcome, and more importantly, the co-occurrence of physical health problems. We chose to work in a rural area because I do believe that is where services are really required. So we chose a rural area as our catchment area, where the other two sites are chosen urban areas. So this is a publication. It's coordinated by the King's College in London, and I'll skip this. But what we saw in India was that we found more women than men, whereas the other two sites had more men than women. So there were more untreated persons with psychosis in India. Family was involved in the help-seeking process in about 75%. But in Trinidad, they had a lot of cannabis-induced psychosis, which is not there on the slide. And the types of visits varied over different time periods. And as I said, lifestyle factor, which is possibly cannabis use, that was the most perceived cause of illness in Trinidad. These are preliminary findings. We are yet to do the analysis. Then this is a very interesting, don't bother to read too much, but just listen to me. We always keep saying distance, axis, distance from the center to the thing matters, and that's one of the reasons persons remain untreated. But this the credit goes to one of the research staff on the project. They took the distance, they measured the distance from the residence of the patient to where they actually sought help. And they found that people like to move long distances. Many of them came to Chennai, to the Institute of Mental Health, to seek care. While there was a DMHP, there were 2 private practitioners, they were all there in that catchment area. But instead they traveled about 60 kilometers, spent a lot more money, and went to the Institute of Mental Health. So we are not very sure. This is something that we need to look into. See, on an average, they have traveled 41.6 kilometers to access service. So this is again a very preliminary finding that we have. We need to explore more into it. But anyway, some of you again can pick up the threads and do it here. The other activities we carried out were during the pandemic. We gave a lot of relief. We got some friends from abroad who contributed money, and we helped a lot of families with food and so on. So again, an intervention model is being designed for the Intrepid 3 grant. We are going to apply for it. And co-designing the interventions with people with lived experience. That is, that's really going to happen this time. And the other thing that we also found was we need to work as an NGO, we need to work with the public health system. We need to work with government. We can't sit in isolation and work. The other major program that we have is early psychosis. I'm going to talk about it tomorrow. So I'm not touching too much into it, except to say that we worked with Dr. Ashok Malla for about 10 years. We have an early psychosis, our first episode psychosis clinic. And then with Swaran Singh, who is also one of your alumni and who will be talking tomorrow, we worked with Swaran. And we also worked on first episode psychosis. So we have established an FEP program at SCAF with a very dedicated multidisciplinary team, and we have developed protocols for the management of FEP cases. But as I said, more details I'll talk about it tomorrow, so I don't want to say it now. The other study is a big study that I mentioned with Swaran Singh and with McGill University, AIMS in Delhi being one of the centers, where we screened about 15,000 students It's one of the largest studies ever done among the student population in schools and in colleges, and we screened for depression, anxiety, and psychosis. So this is another study, and believe me, we found 30% of them scoring on depression. It's an amazingly large figure for young people, who don't articulate sometimes what they feel, or you're not clear about, but they just go one day and commit suicide. So, but this is a kind of warning signal for us that we really need to focus on the young people, because 30% of them scored on depression and about 21% on anxiety. We also developed a youth mental health service program. It's called the SCARF YMH model. We have published it. And we do a lot of peer support in education institutions. We found that they are much more forthcoming when it comes to talking to their own peers than to psychiatrists or psychologists. So we are continuing to train peers. We have a beautiful youth-safe space which is called RHYMES in SCARF, where you can see this building. All these kids come, they do what they want. Basically a lot of activities, games. It's in a very this building does not have any boards on top saying SCARF or anything like that. See, even in SCARF, they're reluctant to come to SCARF because they say, what is schizophrenia? Of course, now there is Dr. Google who tells you everything, whether right or wrong. So they all know what schizophrenia is, right? So they say, we are not having schizophrenia. And if at all they tell others that they are coming to SCARF, they say, I'm going to work there. So that's how it is. But unlike that, this space is non-stigmatized. Nobody makes any judgments. Nobody gives them a diagnosis. Nobody tells them do this and do that. So they're very much on their own. And of course, we have a series of programs for that. Of course, we have also concentrated a lot on youth leadership. I won't go into that. So all this work with youth and early psychosis led to the establishment of the youth mental health to provide literacy, positive mental health, and so on. We have established a youth advisory panel, very smart kids who are able to articulate so well about their problems. A large number of these problems had to do with their relationship with fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers, across generations. And so we have developed youth-friendly spaces. But I do believe that this is a challenge that we are facing for the next 50 years. Of course, COVID has kind of highlighted the whole thing, like he said. But this is something that we really need to mobilize resources for and target the youth in a big way. I don't know if PGI has a program for youth specifically, but if you don't have, you must think of initiating something. It's well worth doing that. We did a lot of genetic studies with Dr. Brian Mowry in Queensland. Again, I'm not going to details, but my premise was, I'll tell you what I thought and why it was important. We studied the Tamil Brahmins. And the reason I wanted to study them at that point in time was, I felt there was more and more intercaste marriages happening. See, in our generation it was less, but if you take the next generation, almost every family, they marry outside the community or outside the caste. But for genetic studies, that's not going to work. So if you want to say, like pure breed, like they say with dogs, so pure breed, then you need to have an absolutely homogeneous population. So luckily we got hold of, you get more of these in rural areas. It's only in the cities we go all over the place, right? So please don't think don't get me wrong. I'm merely talking about it from a genetic study point of view. So we did this study and we got this very nice, we also worked with the University of Madras, and we got a very nice finding where there is a particular gene that was responsible for niacin regulation. And that was the problem in persons with schizophrenia. That was our finding, one of the findings. So we are now administering niacin to persons with schizophrenia as an RCT and trying to see if it works or not. we are also measuring metabolites. You know, so that's what one of the things when I said research must feed into practice or clinical care. Let's see. I mean, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. The pilot study, the findings were inconclusive, but I think that's because of our data. I mean, the sample selection was flawed. But now we are in the process of initiating that. Then from youth, we moved to dementia. We have started a dementia clinic, which is initially funded by Infosys Foundation, where we do the entire works, you know, training families, support groups, awareness, and so on. We do a lot of cognitive stimulation therapy, and we have done a lot of these projects with international funding, some of them with international funding. This is one of the nice projects we did. We have a robo there, a hybrid phase robo for persons with dementia, and it is really very, and this robo fellow is very engaging, you know, I mean, sorry, he's really engaging, he's able to engage persons with dementia much more than you or I talking to them. So we are still in the process of evaluating this, but this is something that has come out from the dementia department. So these are all our research collaborations, both outside India and within India. I would especially like to thank my colleague, Sujit John, who has been with us for many years. He's a joint director of research, and he really helped me to put together all these slides because he's really in the thick of all research programs. So what's the agony? As you know, that was my title, Agony and Ecstasy. So the agony was, in the initial 10 years when SCARF was founded, people came and asked us, what is this word schizophrenia? We are not able to understand it. We are not able to pronounce it. You know, what on earth is this? Why don't you change the name? You know, but Dr. Menon was very particular that unless we keep using that term, people will not, it will not register in people's minds, and they won't even bother to look up and see what it is. So we stuck to the term. So initial 10 years or even 15 years, building infrastructure was very difficult. There's no sustained flow of funds in an NGO like PGI or NIMHANS or you know, AIMS. We don't have that kind of financial support. You know, we are poor, much poorer people when it comes to flow of funds. And we had to strike this very delicate balance between care and research because, as I said, even within the organization, there were people who were questioning us, why research? And as you know, in India, we don't really teach too much research. How many of us have got trained in research through formal training? Some of us have gone abroad, taken short fellowships, and come back. But formal training in research is just beginning in the last few years. But when we first started SCARF, we didn't have anybody who was actually formally trained in research. And as I said, why research? But what was the good news? The good news was that we have established credibility both nationally and internationally. We are the WHO Collaborating Center. We work closely with the central and state governments because I believe that NGOs can only create models. If these models have to be scaled up, you need government. I mean, I firmly believe in that. Because how can SCARF, we have created excellent models, but how can we work in all parts of, even Tamil Nadu is difficult, let alone other parts of India. So I think it is imperative that NGOs work closely with government and vice versa, you know, and we don't see each other as competitors. We have expanded our activities and areas of work like youth mental health and dementia. We are teaching the national board students in psychiatry. And of course, some of you might know, we do this, ICONS is a international conference on schizophrenia, which we do every 2 years, and we run diploma courses. So this is our team. It was taken a few weeks ago during the ICONS 10. We started with 2 staff members initially. When we started, one part-time psychiatrist and one psychologist. That's all we were able to afford when we first started. So it's very nice to see the team has expanded so well, and now we have a little more men also. Otherwise it was rather female dominated. for all the good reasons, I suppose. But now we have a lot of smart young men as well in our team. So I'll tell you a joke about this. Just read it. I'm stopping with this. This is my last slide. So I show this slide when I talk to young people and say, listen, you people have to work hard, and all that. So what happened was, about 2 months ago, I had been to a college. So as usual, I showed, we hardly change our slides, right? So I showed the same slide, and then some people applauded. But then one man stood up in the audience, and he said, he was obviously a lecturer. It was a college, right? So he said, Madam, I think what you are doing is saying is very wrong. I said, why? What is wrong about it? You said, they, while their companions slept, were toiling upward in the night. Are all these boys and girls toiling on their Instagram and mobile phones? How many of them even sleep before 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock? So are they all going to become great? I said, honestly, I had not seen that perspective, neither had Longfellow probably had. But isn't that a situation that we come across in every home now? Parents come and say, he locks up the door at 10 o'clock, he's on his phone, or he's on his laptop or whatever, right? So, I mean, the world is changing. Maybe I should stop showing this slide, I think. But this was an insight that I got from this lecturer. So I stop with this, and thank you once again, sir, and thanks to all of you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. I feel that we don't have enough words to thank you for this wonderful oration. Now I would request Dr. Ipsita and Dr. Rika to hand over mementos to Director Sir to present to ma'am. momento de eso. I now propose a vote of thanks. I sincerely extend my gratitude to Professor Vivek Lal, Director PGI, who took out his valuable time out of his busy schedule to grace the occasion. I will also thank Dr. Thara Rangaswamy for accepting and delivering a wonderful Professor NN Wig Oration. I would also extend my gratitude to the current Dean of the Institute, past directors, past deans of the PGI, Professor Emeritus, and past faculty members of the Institute who have come for the oration. I thank all other dignitaries, DDA sir, FA sir, Superintendent sir, senior faculty members of the Institute, all assembled faculty members of different departments, professional staff and students. I also would extend my thanks to Professor Biman Sakia and members of the telemedicine department of PGI for live telecasting the program. I also would extend my gratitude to all other dignitaries in this dais as well as present online. And we have sincerely made our best efforts to make this oration successful. However, if there are some shortcomings, kindly pardon us. Now I shall request you all to rise for the national anthem.
Tava जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे